Good morning. I hope you're all safe and you're healthy and you're good and well with your families in these hard times again. Um, I'm sorry to be late to get back to you with this a lecture on postcolonialism II, postcolonialism in general. I hope you have read a novel actually. I wanted to make a connection between the first novel, Heart of Darkness, and this Saleh, Season of Migration to the North. And of course, when you read Season of Migration to the North, you can't get tired of it. And you see that every single detail is very important. And it posed a problem to me what to take and what to drop. The most relevant things are all things there actually. Every single detail is relevant. It's a very diverse book, very rich in terms of themes, very rich in terms of tropes and formulas, and while it doesn't yield itself at the very first moment, you have to really read between the lines. You have to associate yourself to historical contexts, of course, the context of colonialism. Okay, so anyway, I just wanted to make sure that you can see the screen now, okay? And just do this. I have to the slide show, just do the normal show. Okay, normal show is much better, I guess. So when we talk about Season of Migration to the North, we bring back to mind a very important novel written by an Arab writer and African writer. So Arab, African, this is a mixed identity again, okay? So Season of Migration to the North, maybe in 2000, 2001, the beginning of this century, Arab writers agreed that it's one of the most important, if not the most important novel, during the last century, 20th century. So they agreed that it's one of the most important novels, one of the most beautiful, wonderful novels ever written in Arabic, which has been, of course, translated into at least 15 languages, and which has been used as a primary source for criticism, literary criticism, post-colonial criticism, psychoanalysis or psychoanalytic criticism, and so on and so forth. So the book has been approached from different perspectives, actually, okay? So our job today is just to give a few ideas about this novel in terms of, or in the light of the framework of what we're studying, post-colonial theory, of course, and at the same time, we have a look at one of the most beautiful novels written at the mid of the 20th century, okay? So let me go back and admit a few people again, okay. Great. So when we talk about this slide, or this presentation will be structured like this, I'm going to talk a little bit about the author, very briefly, the plot and the themes. So let's go directly to the author. So the author is Tayyib Saleh, and I chose this picture from Google. Of course, you have a lot of pictures in Google about Tayyib Saleh, who is from Sudan, of course. And the version of the novel that I have read, or that I have actually I've had access to, is this version. Okay, there are different versions, and this version was written in 2009, and there was an introduction by Leila Alami in this version here. I'm just saying this because sometimes if you've got different versions, of course, the pages are different. So I'm going to detect a few pages here. I refer you back to different pages, but then if you have different versions, of course, you can, there might be an overlap between the pages, okay? So who is Tayyib Saleh? Tayyib Saleh just was hailed from a small village in the north of Sudan, and he was born in 1922, and he passed away in 2009 in London. He studied in Khartoum and in London. He's Sudanese in a northern village of Sudan. He was living at the bank of the Nile, the river, Nile River, okay? And of course, he had a number, or he has a number of publications that we're gonna see in a while. Next slide. Well, people, when they're not punctual now, they disturb me a little bit. I have to admit them in every minute. Okay, so among his publications, we have the Dumat with Hamid in 1960, The Wedding of Zain or Earth Zain 1964, A Handful of Dates, short story collection 1964, Season of Migration to the North, Mawsim al-Hijra ila al-Shamal, which we are going to study today, and which is Season of Migration to the North, Dole Bait or Bandarsha, okay, 1971, and Maryud, I think that's the last publication was Maryud in 1976. Okay, so people talk about him as, I mean, not being prolific writer, but a very important, significant writer in terms of quality. Of course, Season of Migration to the North just made an uproar in the history of Arab literature. All right, good. So that's very simply, very briefly about Tayyib Saleh and his publications. Now, let me move to the characters and the plot. Well, I don't know what to say about the plot, actually, because if you have read a novel, then the plot is clear, okay? So there's this guy who was in Britain for a while, and he came back to Sudan. And there's another voice, so we have like a couple of voices, okay? We have the narrator, an unnamed narrator, of course, and Mustafa Saeed, the main character or the protagonist, who both were in England for at different times, for a while at different times in history. And they both came back to Sudan, and that's where they met, and they had that discussion. And from that discussion, we come to uncover more about the character of Mustafa Saeed, who is a mysterious character. So I think if we talk about characters, there are a lot of characters that I have here, okay? There's this narrator, the first voice, there's Mustafa Saeed as the second voice, but the protagonist's voice. Then there's another range of characters like locals. In terms of men, we have Wad Rayas, grandfather, I mean, Mustafa Saeed's grandfather, Wad Bashir, Mahjoub, Mr. Robinson, but the list is not exhaustive here. We have many more characters, but I think these are the most significant characters in the novel. But there's this guy who's his uncle, there's that driver in the desert, there's the guy who got the cigarette from him in the desert. There are a lot of characters, of course, but I don't think they, I mean, it depends on what reading you make to the novel. They pose a very important, impact on the reading of the novel. For the locals, or I mean, well, the women in general, the local and English women, we have Husna bint Mahmoud, his wife, and this is probably the main, well, not the main character in Sudan, and Bint Marzoub, but we have Mrs. Robinson, we have Sheila Greenwood, we have Anne Hammond, we have Isabella Seymour, we have Jane Morris. Okay, so I think this bunch of characters is what makes a difference in the novel, which is very important in the novel, actually. Okay, so as I said, from the characters we can understand a little bit about the plot. Is that this narrator, a named narrator, which started, of course, the first voice in the novel, came back from England after studying or having studied poetry. So he got his PhD on studying an English poet. And when he came back to Sudan, there was a party or an event with local people, his family, of course, and his friends. Then he spot a strange guy, and the strange guy was Mustafa Saeed, all right? So ever since that meeting, Mustafa Said started to haunt the narrator, and the narrator has become obsessed with this character of Mustafa Said. So one day they were sitting together, and over a drink, they were drinking, and Mustafa Said recited some poetry, English poetry. And then the narrator was just shocked because a guy with that pronunciation, with that kind of intellectual abilities of reciting poetry, English poetry, was not really normal. And he thought that this guy must have left a past behind. And this past behind was one of the leading formulas in the novel. Okay, so which means that the mystery behind Mustafa Said is what the Tayyip Saleh has been trying to argue for in his novel. So things happened that they got together for a while, but Mustafa Said never divulged his secrets. Okay, and then every once in a while there would be like meetings, and other characters would appear, like the locals in Sudan. But then what happened is that Mustafa Said did not really finish his existence or his presence throughout the novel, and it was through the voice of the unnamed narrator that Mustafa Said actually, that we know more about Mustafa Said, especially when he left a letter to him, and the key to that chamber of, well, I wouldn't say chamber of horrors, but chamber of secrets. It's from that chamber that we come to understand the past of Mustafa Said and all his endeavors in London and England with different British white women, and his sexual endeavors and intellectual endeavors in London, of course. And from those sexual intellectual endeavors, we come to understand, of course, the many complicated problems and issues of colonial discourse and post-colonial discourse and identity, problems of home and away. And so these are the issues or themes that we have in this novel. So this is exactly what I've been talking here, that we have different themes and tropes. Well, for those who haven't read the novel, of course, you have to read the novel. It's really, it's enticing, it's very significant in terms of Arabic literature, and also in terms of English language, because it was translated by Genius Davis. And his translation, just like a lot of people have read his the English version of the novel, but I know one of my friends who is British also, just I mean, she was reading Arabic, and when she learned Arabic, she wanted to read Seasonal Migration to the North in Arabic, to enjoy it in Arabic language. And finally, she was able to complete the reading in Arabic, and she said, finally, I have read Mosim al-Hijra ila Shamal, which is probably more significant when we speak about the national language and the original language in which it was written. Okay, so the themes are very many, so many in the novel, but of course they're not exist. List is not exhaustive again. So we have East and West. Of course, there's always a reference to this dialogue, this eternal dialogue between the East and the West in the novel. We have a trope about suicide and murder, because all the English girls that he met, Mustafa Said met, actually committed suicide, and one of them was murdered by Mustafa Said himself. There is this theme about home and away. All right, so anyway, good. So as I was talking about the themes here, and I said that when we talk about, when you read a novel, you find a collection of themes, actually, and this list is not exhaustive. We may find a lot of other themes, okay, talking about East and the West, the conflict or confrontation between the East and the West, the suicide, murder, home and away. This is the issue of identity, and we're going to talk about identity in my next lecture, okay. There is a lot to say about superstition, there is a lot to say about colonialism, post-colonial discourse, about, excuse me, Orientalism, about eroticism, sexual endeavors, Mustafa Said, identity. We talk about migration, identity, and home and away. Okay, so very simply today, I will be explaining a few things in the novel about colonial discourse, post-colonial discourse. Okay. So let me tell you first that Season of Migration to the North is kind of some sort of a parody. All right, a parody means that there was a novel written before, and then this novel comes as a response to the novel. So many critics have seen or have considered Saleh's novel to be just a parody to Conrad's Heart of Darkness. Okay. And when you think about that, or when you scrutinize, of course, the passages, you find that there's a lot of similarity between the two novels. Okay, and well, it was it was argued that it's just a very straightforward response to Conrad's novel, but then it could be. It could be the story could be. Uh, the story is totally different, but then there are a few elements that resemble each other. When you read Season of Migration to the North, it's reminiscent to Joseph Conrad's Heart of Darkness. When you read Joseph Conrad's Heart of Darkness, it takes your mind a little bit to Saleh's Season. Okay, so I brought for you a few elements that resemble each other, look like each other in the two novels. Okay, so while Heart of Darkness was in the heart of Africa, Season of Migration to the North was in the heart of Europe. Okay, the Congo, the country, or Belgian Congo, is like the space that hosts the story, and now it's England, London. Okay, the Congo River, Thames, there was a river called the Nile as well. The unnamed narrator, there was also an unnamed narrator in Season of Migration to the North. Okay, this mysterious curse, it just resembles or very similar to the mysterious Mustafa Said. So mystery is one very common point that binds these characters together. There's tragic death of the protagonist at the end, and there's also tragic death of the protagonist at the end, Mustafa Said. The narrator was as a trustee by the end. Also, Mustafa Said was as a trustee, which means that he was trusted with all the what was left by Mustafa Said to be given to his wife and his children, especially, and also the letter and the key to the room. Okay, so the Mustafa Said just entrusted the narrator for his children, and also there was this Kurtz in the Heart of Darkness. Kurtz, if you remember, entrusted the narrator with the letter to take it to his wife in England, back to England. Then there was a letter from Kurtz, there was a letter from Mustafa Said, and mysterious Kurtz and mysterious Mustafa Said. So this kind of, or this resemblance in elements is what makes this novel, Saleh's novel, actually as a straightforward parody or similar novel of as that of Conrad's Heart of Darkness, of course. So when we talk about parody, of course, we talk about, it's not just the similarity that the two novels are similar in few elements, but it's a kind of response to the novel. If, as if we say that if Conrad was inculcating racism and colonialism, discourses of racism, racial discourse, and colonial discourse in his novel, Mustafa Said is also responding to the Conrad by saying that we are also heroes, and this is what we can do, and this is what we have done. This is how we can respond, we can attack colonialism. Okay, then there's another very important element here. Just one of the images, of course, that I opted for in the novel is one significant image of this parody is that, look at this passage here, Mr. Mustafa, the bird has fallen into the snare, denial that snake god has gained a new victim. So you can't miss, the invocation, or to go back to Conrad's novel, when you read this passage and you think about the Congo River and the Nile River have been depicted as a snake, you remember, okay, as a snare that lurks in the darkness in ambush for silly birds. So the bird is Marlowe in the heart of darkness, if you remember. So remember, but the bird here is another woman from England, already the victim, another woman who's going to be new victim for Mustafa Said into his bed. Okay, but there's this simile or similarity of images between the two novels, between the two passages. Okay, so but in both stories, the white man or the woman is the victim of the snake or a snare. The white man in Africa and the white woman in her own territory, where the trap has been set by a black Englishman. All right. So I think, let me admit a few more people again. So, oh my goodness. Give me a second. All right. So as I said, this is just one very particular image about this parody here. And once you read this, of course, your mind goes straight forward back to the novel of Joseph Conrad, where there's the river, and this river resembles a snake. And this snake, of course, is lurking in darkness to get a new victim, which was Marlowe then. And the victim is a white woman here in England. Okay, this is just a simple image. Of course, you can, while you read a novel, you can find out about different passages that that are evocative of Conrad's Heart of Darkness. Okay, so now when we talk about season of migration to the north, I detected the number of passages for you, and from these passages we're going to see how the colonial discourse is referred to and the post-colonial discourse as well. Okay, from these passages you're going to see how the wonderful Tayyib Saleh hovers or ranges between issues of post-colonial, colonial and post-colonial discourses by being very insinuating, which means he hints to these discourses in a very beautiful way that is recurrent in the novel, that is repeating in the novel every once in a while. You could see that. So on purpose, I want to detect for you the passages that repeat themselves a lot in the novel. So look at this passage on page 30, for example. My bedroom was a spring well of sorrow, the germ of fatal disease. The infection had stricken these women 1,000 years ago, but I had stirred up the latent depths of the disease until it had got out of control and had killed. So it's a great passage about colonial discourse, but which was like 1,000 years ago. All right. Again, so why did I highlight? So, by the way, all passages are highlighted in orange. All right. I hope they're clear. And wherever is not orange, then it's just interpretation of the passage, or maybe another passage from theory. Okay, that we can use to analyze the passage from the novel. Okay. So here, I wanted to look at the germ of a fatal disease, the germ of a fatal disease. On page 29, before page 30, these girls were not killed by Mustafa Said, but by the germ of a deadly disease that assailed them 1,000 years ago. Again, the germ of a deadly disease. And then it has been repeated, or it was repeated on page 30. Then you go all the way to page 56. How sad it would be if either or both of my sons grew up with a germ of this infection in them, the wanderlust. Okay, we're going to explain all of this, of course. Germ, again, the germ of this infection. And then all the way to page 79, as far as I could go, of course, but you can always find other passages with these words, germ. They, the British, or this is my word, I mean, it refers to the British, they imported to us the germ of the greatest European violence, the germ of a deadly disease that struck them more than 1,000 years ago. So when you think about these passages and what's common thread between the different passages is germ of fatal disease. So the word germ and the word disease are very much repeated in the novel, all right? Which means that Tayyip Saleh is actually aware of going back to, of mentioning colonialism, the problem of colonialism every once in a while in the novel. I mean, throughout the whole structure of the novel, throughout the whole story, journeying of Mustafa Said from Sudan to England and back, there's this recurrent repetition of the germ of fatal disease, all right? Which means that the colonialism has always been associated with the character. The character is always associated with colonialism, all right? He could be just a product of colonial discourse. That's what the main argument of Tayyip Saleh here, okay? So very